Welcome back to another very exciting tutorial here at the PhotoshopTrainingChannel.com. My name is Jesus Ramirez, and you can find me on Twitter at JRFromPTC. In this video, I will show you how to create a 3D model from a photograph. We'll use two Adobe stock images and we'll create a phone advertisement composition, something that has a nightlife feel to it. This technique will allow you to create other types of images like this one. But in this tutorial, we'll only focus on the composition with the nightclub. Also, stick around after the tutorial because I will take a few minutes to show you how to import 3D models into Sketchfab directly from Photoshop. From Sketchfab, you can create a portfolio of all your 3D models and also embed them into your website or blog and interact with them in 3D space. It's a really cool way of displaying your 3D models online. Okay, let's get started with the tutorial. The first thing you need to do is create your document. So I'm going to go into File, New, and I'm going to have a document that's 1920 by 1080. I'm going to press OK. And now we need to find the images that we're going to use for this tutorial. I already found those two images on Adobe Stock. I created a library called 3D Phone Tutorial. You can create a library by clicking on this button here, Create New Library. You can name it what you want. And you don't necessarily need to follow these steps in order to accomplish the effect, but I wanted to mention the libraries in case you want to start using them in your projects. And the two images that I'm going to use, as I mentioned, are from Adobe Stock. So I'm going to go into the Adobe Stock website, stock.adobe.com. And I already found the images that we're going to use for this project. For the background, we're going to use this one titled Bar in a Nightclub. You can see the file number here. And also in the corner here, you can pause the video and write it down if you like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this number here and I can paste it in the search bar here and click on go, and Adobe Stock will find that particular image. You can click on it and you can save a preview to any of your libraries or to the desktop. If you're in Adobe Photoshop CC, then you can create a library and save it there. If you're in an older version of Photoshop, you can just save it to the desktop. The phone that we're going to use is this one here. I've already licensed this image, so you can see the icon here, and you can save this to your library. Notice that there's no preview button because this one has already been licensed. You can copy the file number. In your case, of course, you probably will have to write it down, and you can also find images directly from Photoshop. Notice this search bar here. Search Adobe Stock. I can paste that number there, and Adobe Stock will immediately find that file, and I can download it to one of my libraries if I want to. I'm just going to click on this X to get rid of that, and I have my two files here. So the phone is easy to bring in. I can just click and drag that over onto the composition that you're working with. So for my background, I'm going to show you how you would bring it in using an older version of Photoshop. Just go into File, Place Embedded, find the file, and click on Place. And that's going to bring it in. So you can do either or. And what I'm going to do now is click and drag the background below the phone. And I just want to mention that if you're using a preview file, you're going to see the watermark across the image, and that's okay. You can still work with that and practice with it. And if you're ready to purchase, simply license the file. Okay, so now let's start working in the actual project. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask around the phone, and I'm going to use a vector mask. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the rounded corner rectangle tool and make sure that I have path selected. And then I'm going to click and drag and create a rectangle that follows the shape of the phone. I'm not worried about the curve of the edges yet. I'm just worried about the horizontal and vertical lines of the phone. And I'm going to try to match those accordingly. I'm holding the space bar on the keyboard to move the path as I create it. And once I match the lines of the edges of the phone, I'm going to release my mouse button and it's going to create a path. Then in the properties panel, I can click and drag and round the edges more so they match the actual phone. And I'm a little bit off in certain areas, and that's okay. It's not going to make a big difference. Then I'm going to come and select the phone. I'm going to hover over the mask icon button here at the bottom. And I'm going to hold Alt and Control, that's Option Command on the Mac, and click. And this is going to create a vector mask. This is not a mask that is created with pixels is a mask that's created by using vector curves. And if I click on the path selection tool, you can see the path here and I can move it around, but I really don't want to do that. I just wanted to show you that. What you want to do at this point is you want to make sure that there's no white along the edges of the phone. If there is, just click on the vector mask and then press Control T, Command T in the Mac, and simply adjust the edges a little bit. And I'm going to bring this in just a little bit more and maybe bring this side in as well. And that looks pretty good. What I'm going to do now is click on the bar background. And actually, before I even do that, I'm just going to delete the original background because I don't need it. And I'm going to rename this layer to background. And I'll rename the top layered phone. Okay, so now with the background layer selected, I can press Control T, Command T to transform, and I'm going to scale that up. I'm not going to lose any resolution by upscaling it because it's a smart object. You can see the icon there. The icon on the top, little cloud icon, it means that it's tied to the image in your Adobe Creative Cloud library. The one on the bottom is not tied to anything, but it is a smart object. So I can move this around and find a good spot for it. And I'm going to collapse this just so we can see it better. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And I'm zooming in by holding Alt, Option on the Mac, and using the mouse wheel to zoom in or out. Now it's time to turn our phone into a 3D model. So I'm going to click on the phone layer. Then I'm going to go into 3D, New 3D Extrusion from Selected Layer. Photoshop then is going to ask me if I want to change my workspace to the 3D workspace. And I'm going to click on yes because I like this arrangement of my panels when working in 3D. If you're working in 3D and you have the move tool selected, you're also going to get the 3D tools on the options bar here and at the bottom here. You should also see the ground plane grid. You can see those lines here. And by using these three handles here, you can control the camera. You can orbit, you can pan, and you can dolly the camera. And the first thing you want to do is adjust the camera so that it matches the ground plane of the image. So I'm going to place this accordingly here. And since there's no real lines that you can follow to find the horizon line and match the horizon lines, there's the horizon line of the 3D model here. You sort of have to guess where it would be. And I think this is a good guess. So I'm going to dolly this back and pan this right about there. Maybe dolly it forward. And I think this is going to be a good spot for it. What you want to do now is save your camera so you can always come back to it. And before I save it, I'm actually going to zoom out just to make sure things look good. And I think that they do. So this is going to be a good place for my camera. And I'm going to click on Current View here in the 3D panel. Then I'm going to go into the View dropdown and save it. And I'm going to call it Final View. Then I'm going to press OK. Now, if I move my camera around, I can always come back to that same spot by clicking on the Final View camera icon here. Brings that back. So no matter how much I move my camera, I can always come back to that spot that we set as our final view. If at this point your phone is looking a little too small, you can click on it and you'll see these handles here that you can click and drag. Each of these handles has three areas where you can click on. You have the tip here, which moves the 3D model. This one here rotates it. And this one scales it on whatever axis you're clicking on. I'm going to undo that. And just remember, these handles control the 3D object. Right down here, these control the camera. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to rotate the camera a little bit just so I can see the side of the phone. And we're going to work on the thickness. I can, of course, come in here and scale it along the Z-axis, but there's a better way of doing this. You can simply go into the Properties panel, make sure that this icon is selected, which is the Mesh icon, and click and drag the slider of the extrusion depth to the left. Notice how the extrusion depth decreases, and you just got to find an appropriate width for your phone. So maybe something like that will work. Notice that if I rotate the phone to the back, we also see the screen of the phone, and we want to remove that. So I'm going to click on it once. Notice how the back inflation material is selected, and what controls the color and texture of your 3D object is the diffuse. Currently is set to gray, but notice this icon here of a file. That means that we have a texture attached to it. And that texture, if I hover over that icon, you'll see that it's the phone that we started with. So I'm going to remove it. I'm going to click on it and select remove texture. And notice what happened. This changes. And then I can change the diffuse color to whatever color I want. In this case, I want my phone to be black. So I'm going to click on black here and notice the color change. Then press OK. I can also click on the extrusion here of my phone, the extrusion material. This one does not have a material, but I can change the color to black as well. Then I can rotate the camera around, and now we see our phone. And just as a point of reference, in case you want to make some adjustments to your phone, if I click on one of the edges, it gets highlighted on the appropriate material. As you can see here or here. Anyway, so on the front information material, we have a texture, and we obviously know what the texture is the image that we started with. And I can edit that if I want to. So I can go into Edit Texture. Photoshop is going to open up a new tab, and you can see the texture we're working with. If I hide this layer, you can see the UV properties of the texture. And this is what gives the texture to the phone. So I can come in here and select this icon here, and I can turn off the UV overlays, or I can change a color to maybe like red or something else. But I'm just going to leave it at black for now. I can turn this on. I can create a new layer, and I can paint something in here. So maybe I'll just paint with red so you can see how that works. I'm just going to simply paint this red line here. Then I'm going to press Control S, Command S on the Mac to save, go back onto my 3D model, and you can see how that change was applied. I'm going to go back into my texture here and just simply delete that layer because we don't need it. So that's how you would go about making changes to what's displayed on the phone. And I'm just going to close this and save it. Notice that's now gone. And you can actually do the same thing to the back side and add, for example, a logo or something like that if you wanted to, by clicking on the Move tool, rotating the camera to the back side, clicking on it, and just make sure that you're inside the 3D model here. So I'm going to double click on this, click on the back side. Notice that the inflation material is selected, and you can just create a new texture and place whatever you would like on the back of the phone. I'm not going to do that for this tutorial, but I just wanted to mention that. Anyway, so now we have our phone in the 3D space, and I'm going to click on the final view just so you can see how it's going to look at the end. And we can work on lighting now. I can click on the infinite light. This interactive display appears, and I can click on it and drag it and adjust the lighting. Notice that the lighting matches the ground plane. And by the way, if you have an object and is maybe under the ground plane, the effect won't work. You got to make sure that your object is sitting directly on the ground plane. So if it's not, select the object, then go into 3D, move object to ground plane, and there it is, sitting on the ground. So now you can see the shadow interacting with the ground. So maybe this is a good spot for the shadow. I like that, but it's a little too sharp. So what I can do is, under the infinite light, soften up the shadow. And I'm going to soften that up quite a bit, so maybe around 69%. And then with the Marquee tool, you can press M or click on this icon here, make a selection around the shadow, and click on Render. The reason we're making a selection is because rendering can take quite a bit of time, and by selecting a certain area, we save a lot of time on rendering, and we can see how an adjustment affects a specific part of the 3D model. And I like the shadow, and I'm just going to press the Escape key on the keyboard, and then press Control D to deselect, and I can keep working on my phone. I'm going to click on the Move tool, select the phone, and one of the things I'm going to work on now is the cap of the 3D model, which is going to give a bevel to the edge of the phone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it just a little bit so I can see it right about here. Then click on the cap here, adjust the width. You can see how the phone comes out, or you can have the phone go in a little bit. And maybe you can have a different contour, so maybe a cone contour. Press OK. Notice how that changes. And I got to go back into the cap here and adjust the width. Might be a little too much. Just bring it back in just a little bit. Something like that maybe. And now you can see the cap there on the edge. And you can adjust that however you like. So what I'm going to do now is go back into the final view. Click on the phone. Hover over the Y-axis rotate handle. Click and drag it and rotate it just a little bit. maybe something like this. And now I'm going to just add a little bit of reflection on the phone. And to do that, I'm going to use an image-based light. So I'm going to click on the environment. I'm going to click on this icon here, and I'm going to edit the texture. And that's going to open up a new tab. Currently, this is our image-based light. If I click on the layers panel, you can see it here. And I want to work with the actual background that we're working with. So I'm going to click on this tab here, and I'm going to click on the background layer, right click on it, and select duplicate layer. And I want to duplicate that onto the default ibl.psd. Press OK. Then go back into the image-based light and you'll see the image here. Unfortunately, the canvas is too small, but we can increase the canvas to match the size of this layer by going into Image, Reveal All, and it's going to reveal all the pixels inside of this document. And here it is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to delete the background because we don't need it anymore. And I'm going to just press Control S, Command S on the Mac to save and go back into the image we're working with. Notice that now the phone has a little brown tint to it, and that's because the image-based light in the environment here is controlling some of that light. If I click and drag on this orb, you'll see that the phone is somewhat reflecting the environment, but the reason it's not reflecting it that much is because the reflection is set to 0. So if I click on the front inflation material, hold Shift, and click on the last material at the bottom, it's going to select all of them, and I can adjust reflection of all the materials at the same time. I'm just going to increase the reflection a little bit, about 19%. I can come back into the environment and watch what happens when I rotate. Now it's reflecting more of that background, and you can see on the edges here how that background is reflected in. You just got to find an area that you like, so maybe something like this. I think I kind of like that light. I can click on the Marquee Tool or simply press M and just make a render on the phone just so you can see how that's working out. And I can already tell that things are looking pretty good, but the problem is that the phone is a little too bright. So maybe I want to reduce the infinite light a little bit. So maybe bring that down like so and make another render and just see how that looks. And that's looking a little bit better. So I'm going to just press the escape key on the keyboard, and I'm going to move the environment a little bit more. I don't really like that red on the side of the phone, so I'm going to try to get some of this blue there, and I like that better. So let me just make a render here and see how that looks. And we're just going to keep it here for now. I'm not 100% happy with it, but I think this will work for the tutorial. What I'm going to do now is create the reflection. It's going to be coming off the table here. Notice that these lights are reflecting on the table, so we want to match those reflections. With the environment selected under properties, you can come into the ground plane options and notice the reflections here. You can increase the opacity, so maybe do something like 17%. With the Marquee Tool, make a selection under the phone and click on Render, and you'll see the reflection. The problem is that it's not strong enough and it's not rough enough. So I'm going to press the Escape key, Control D, Command D to deselect, increase the opacity a little bit, maybe 27%, and increase the roughness about 11%. Make a selection, render. And I think this might be a little too strong still, so I'm going to increase the roughness even more, 33%, and render again. And I think this will probably work, so we're going to keep it here for now. At this point, we can make final adjustments to our phone. For example, we can position it better if we need to. So maybe move it back, move it to the left. That way we can have room on this side to include some text if we want to. And now that I'm looking at it, I don't think the phone is big enough. So I can click on this center scale uniformly box, click and drag it to the right to scale uniformly. So maybe something like that. The problem now is that our 3D object is not sitting on the ground plane, but we know how to fix that. We can go into 3D, move object to ground plane, and there it is. And I'm going to push it back just a little bit and maybe push it to the right some more, maybe something like that. And we have room to put text on this side, maybe another phone on the bottom and another phone behind this one. And I'll show you how to do that. When you select your phone, you have two ways of duplicating the phone. You can duplicate a 3D object or create an instance. A duplicate means that you're going to create another version of the same phone, but it's not going to have any ties to the original. If you instance an object, you're going to duplicate the phone as well, but it will be tied to the original, meaning any changes you make to the original will also affect the instances. So that's what I'm going to use for this tutorial, an instance object. Notice it here, phone 1, and I can click and drag it here. And now I have two phones, and I actually want to put this one behind the other phone, and I also want to rotate it. So I'm just going to rotate it all the way to the back there, maybe move it out a little bit more so we can see the back of the phone. Keep rotating on the y-axis and just place it wherever you think looks good, maybe something like that. If I make a quick render, you'll see how that looks. And we'll just leave that there for now. That looks okay. We can keep moving it more if you want to create a better composition, but for this tutorial, I think this will be good enough. I'm going to instance the original phone one more time, just so I can show you how to place a phone line on the table. So I'm just going to make an instance, click and drag that and move it out, and rotate it along the z-axis 90 degrees. If you can't get to it by dragging this, you can always click on this icon here on the coordinates and just type 90. Then click and push it down, or simply go into 3D, move object to ground plane, and now the phone is on the table, and we can move it around. We can rotate it accordingly. So maybe we can just rotate this one to this side and move it back along the table, somewhere there. I'm going to press M on the keyboard for the Marquee Tool. At this point, I can do a render of the entire composition, or I can come into the Layers panel and I can keep making adjustments that will further enhance this image. One of the things I'm not liking is that I'm looking for a nightclub type of vibe, and it's a little too bright. It doesn't have a lot of contrast, so I'm just going to use a regular adjustment layer to fix that. I'm going to click on the adjustment layer icon here, then go into gradient map, and I'm just going to color grade this image using this gradient map. I'm going to select a different one, though. I'm going to click on this gear icon here and choose photographic toning, press OK, and then click on this one right here, right in the middle, blue number 2. Then go into the blend modes and choose soft light, and look at the difference before and after. Now it has more of that nightclub feel that I'm going for. I'm just going to bring the opacity down just a little bit, maybe about 81%. What I would recommend doing now is just rendering the entire image, and after you make that render, you may need to make a few adjustments with gradients, with curves, or something like that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to render the entire scene by making a selection around the areas where I have 3D models, and I'm just going to subtract the areas where there are no 3D models, like right here, just so that the image only renders in these areas. I don't need to waste time on the side here. So this is what I'm going to render. I'm going to actually subtract from this side as well, and I'm just going to disable the gradient map layer and just do a render, just so we can actually see what the render is going to look like without the effects. But once the render is complete, we will apply the effect again by enabling the gradient map. And the rendering is going to take a little while, so what I'm going to do now is just pause the video and let Photoshop continue with the render. And the rendering is now complete. You can see the shadows and reflections of the phones on the surface here. I'm going to go ahead and enable the gradient map overlay to apply the style we had before. At this point, we're pretty much done with the composition. One of the few things that you might want to do is make some adjustments just to further enhance the realism of this image. One of the things that I would do, for example, would be to work with the screen. The screen looks a little bit dim, so one of the things that you can do is with the phone layer selected, you can come into the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm just going to do it quickly here, but you may want to take a little more time if you're working on a project. But make a selection out of the screen. Once you have the selection, you can press Ctrl-J, Command-J on the Mac, and that duplicates that layer. And I can just set the blend mode to color dodge, and the screen looks just a little bit brighter. You can also bring down the opacity if you like, or even apply a layer mask and mask out some of the areas that might be a little strong. So I'm going to select a soft brush so the hardness will be at 0%. Use the bracket keys on the keyboard to increase or decrease the size of the brush. and just maybe brush out some of the parts in the middle here. But with the mask selected in the properties panel, I can use the density and adjust the opacity of that mask. And then maybe I could add an outer glow. So I would select overlay and maybe an orange color like so, and adjust the opacity of the glow. Maybe something like that. So this is what we had before, and this is after. And you may want to do the same on the reflection in the surface, just to make it a little more realistic. So after creating the tutorial, I decided that I was going to spend just a few minutes showing you how you can get your 3D model into Sketchfab, which allows you to create an online portfolio of your 3D models, and you can embed them into your website, much like you could embed a YouTube video. So I'm going to quickly show you how to do that through Photoshop. I've gone ahead and added just a few things to the 3D model that we created in the tutorial, including some buttons here on the side and a camera and the Photoshop training channel logo on the back of the phone. And before we go any further, I just want to point out that you do need to create a Sketchfab account. So you need to go into sketchfab.com and create an account. So what you need to do is go into Photoshop, then go into 3D, share 3D layer on Sketchfab. Click on that, and Photoshop is going to ask you to input a token ID, which is going to allow you to import the 3D model onto the website. You can click on request token and have a token emailed to the email that is tied to your account. I usually find that this takes a little bit too long for me. What I like to do instead is go into the actual Sketchfab website, then go into their settings, password, and API, and copy the API token directly from here. So highlight it, copy it, go back into Photoshop, and you can paste the token here. Then you can add a title, description, and tags to your 3D model. You can decide whether it's a public 3D model or a private 3D model. Then click on upload, and Photoshop will then upload the 3D model onto the website. And from the Sketchfab website, you can see the 3D model that you brought in from Photoshop. You can click on it and rotate it and see the 3D model in 3D space. You can also click on this embed button. You can copy the code and paste it on your website. This is an iframe, much like a YouTube video. So you can just copy that code onto your website and display this 3D model, essentially this window you see here on your website. A couple of things I want to mention before we finish is that if you want to get this glossy reflective effect, you need to go into settings, 3D settings, and adjust the materials for each of the faces of the phone. So for example, the front face material here is front inflation material. And notice what happens when I change the specular color. See that reflection? So adjust it accordingly on specular. And then on environmental reflection, you can bump that up or bring it down accordingly. And you will need to do that for all the inflation materials that you want to have a reflective surface on. And then you can just rotate it and see how the reflection works. I'm going to go ahead and exit this. I'm not going to save it, but you may want to save it. And the last thing that I want to mention is that when I was working on importing this 3D model onto Sketchfab, I kept getting this result. The textures were not working properly, as you can see there. So what I needed to do was go into Photoshop. With the 3D model selected, go into 3D, generate UVs, press OK, and uncheck merge materials, and keep low distortion checked, and press OK. And this is going to regenerate the UV textures on our phone, and it should allow it to be imported into Sketchfab accordingly. And by the way, after you create a Sketchfab account, feel free to follow me. My username is JR from PTC. You can search that on the search bar, or you can find a link to it from the description of this video. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down below. If you enjoyed the tutorial, don't forget to click that like button and share this video with a friend. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Photoshop training channel now. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.